12. Flight. At the age of 3.5. My family, including all the other relatives, decided to move to Thailand. Wrote Leah's sister May in an autobiography she was assigned in her 8th grade language arts class at Merced's Hoover Junior High School. On our way to Thailand was something my parent will never forget. It was one of the scariest time of my life. And maybe my parents. We had to walk by feet. Some of family, however, leave their kids behind, kill, or beat them. For example, one of the relative has tried to kill one of his kid, but luckily he didn't died, and managed to come along with the group. Today, he's in America carrying a scar on his forehead. My parents had to carry me and 2 of my younger sisters. True and Yer. My mom could only carried me, and my dad could only my sister. True with many other things which they have to carry, such as rices, food, clothing, and blankets for overnight. My parents pay one of the relative to carry Yer. One of my sister who died in Thailand was so tired of walking, saying that she can't go on any longer. But she dragged along and made it to Thailand. There was gunshot going on and soldier were close to everywhere. If there was a gunshot, we were to look for a place to hide. On our trip to Thailand, there were many gunshots, and instead of looking for a place to hide, my parents would drag our hands or put us on their back and run for their lives. When it gets too heavy, my parents would toss some of their stuff away. Some of the things they had throw away are valuable to them, but our lives were more important to them than the stuffs. You have had an exciting life, wrote her teacher at the end of the essay. Please watch verbs in the past tense. The Lee's trip to Thailand, which took place in 1979, was their second attempt to escape from Laos after the war. On their first attempt, in 1976, they and about 40 other families from Hue Sui, with whom they were fleeing, were captured by Vietnamese soldiers on the 3rd day of their journey. While they were hiding in an abandoned rice field, they were herded back to their village at gunpoint. Even when our children had to go to the bathroom in the forest, they still held a gun at them, and the guns were as big as the children. Recalled Now Qaug. Phua, one of the Lee daughters, fell ill and died soon after their return. At that time a lot of people were decaying and there wasn't medicine. And so we didn't have 8 children anymore. We had 7. The Lees spent 3 more years in Hue Sui, under intermittent guard. Like most Hmong villages in Sayaburi, Hue Sui had seen no fighting during the war, and none of its men had been recruited by Vang Pao. Sayaburi is the only province in Laos that lies west of the Mekong, and this natural barrier had isolated it from the prolonged warfare that destroyed hundreds of villages on the other side of the river. After the war, however, Hue Sui was tossed into the political melee along with the rest of the country. Because they were Hmong, the village's residents were regarded as traitors and were systematically abused by the occupying forces from the former North Vietnam. If you did anything, said Now Qaug, the Vietnamese would kill you. If you stole a knife or food, they would call the citizens to come and watch and they would just shoot you right there. If you harvested 300 buckets of rice in a year, the Vietnamese would take 200. If you had 5 chickens, they would take away 4 and leave you 1. The Vietnamese would give you only 2 yards of material. Here, Phua interrupted, saying, and it wasn't good material, to make clothes for the whole family. I ask you, if it is like this, how do you divide that cloth between 10 people? In the spring of 1979, the Lee's infant son, Yee, died of starvation. My little baby was cold and hungry and I was hungry too, said Phua. I didn't have anything to eat, and the baby just ate my milk. And I didn't have any more milk. I just held him like this and he died in my arms. 1 month later, the Lees, along with about 400 other members of the Lee, Yang, Vang, and Xiong clans, decided to try to escape again. This was the journey May described in her essay. The saddest thing was that I had a couple of really beautiful horses, said Now Qaug, and I had to just take the rope off and let them go in the forest, and I never knew whether they were alive or not. Then we just left. We had bought a lot of guns and hidden them, and the young men would walk in the front and the side, and they would hold the guns. The Vietnamese found out that we were running away. They started to burn all around us so we couldn't walk. The flames were as high as our house here in Merced. Some fires were in the front and some fires were in the back. And the children were really scared. But some people were really brave and they just jumped through the flames and somehow we survived. After we crossed the fire, the Vietnamese thought we were taking the usual route where most Hmong go, and they planted some mines in the ground. But we went a different way, and the Vietnamese walked into their own trap and they got hurt. We carried the babies, and when we came to steep mountains we tied ropes to the children and the old people and we pulled them up. It was cold and the children were hungry. I was very scared because we had a lot of children and it would be easy for the soldiers to kill them. Some other people who came from our village just before us, 2 of their little children started running across a rice field, and the Vietnamese shot them. I don't know how many times they shot them, but their heads were all squashed. After 26 days on foot, the Lees crossed the border into Thailand, where they spent a year in 2 refugee camps before being cleared to emigrate to the United States. Their daughter Ge, whom May described in her essay as being so tired of walking, saying that she can't go on any longer, died in the first camp. The Lees never considered staying in Laos. They and the 150,000 other Hmong who fled to Thailand after the war were exercising the immemorial Hmong preference for flight, resistance, or death over persecution and assimilation. The Hmong rapidly learned that because most of them had either supported the United States or attempted to remain neutral, the Lao People's Democratic Republic viewed them as enemies of the state. The 20% who had supported the communist cause were rewarded with soft treatment and, in some cases, government positions, to teach a lesson on the importance of subordinating ethnicity to party principles. Some were selected to execute pro-American Hmong prisoners. 3 weeks after General Vang Pao was airlifted to Thailand, nearly 40,000 Hmong men, women, and children marched toward Vientiane. Some say they hope to cross the Mekong River and rejoin their leader. Others say they plan to ask the Vientiane government for guarantees of security. Outside the town of Hin Hup, Pathet Lao troops opened fire on several hundred of these Hmong while they were crossing a narrow bridge over the Nam Lik River. At least 4 were killed by gunfire or drowning. Dozens were wounded. When he heard about the Hin Hup massacre, former Prime Minister Sovanna a neutralist who was kept on as an advisor to the new government, is said to have remarked to a foreign diplomat, "The Mio Hmong have served me well. It is unfortunate that the price of peace in Laos is their liquidation." One afternoon in Merced, I was invited to tea at the small, Spartan apartment of Blaya Yao Mua, the Hmong leader, who had arranged my first meeting with the Lees. Blaya's father was the Chow Muang, or administrative leader, of the city of Chiang Kuang. He was assassinated, presumably by the Pathet Lao, when Blaya was 9. 2 of Blaya's brothers died during the war. I asked Blaya what had happened to the Hmong after the war was lost. In polished but idiosyncratic English, like Jonas Vange, he had learned it after he was fluent in Hmong, Lao, Thai, and French. He replied, "People from the Western Sphere cannot understand what it was like. In the new vision of the country of Laos, there is no reason to let the Hmong live. If you don't agree with the Pathet Lao, they can kill you just like a pig or a chicken. They try to force you down to the lowlands. If you don't go, they would kill the animals and burn everything in your village. Your house, your rice, your cornstalk. They separate Hmong families and send the kids far away from the parents. They make you change your name so there would be no more clan names. They tell you to stop speaking Hmong. You are not supposed to practice Hmong rituals. When I was a boy, my mother would call in the Tsiv Neeb whenever we were sick, even if it was just a headache. But after the war, anybody that would do that, security would hear about it, and a few days later they would come to take you to a kind of meeting, and ask you the reason. And if your explanations are too rightist, they would take you away. They wanted Hmong culture to disappear, but the Hmong cannot be assimilated. The Chinese cannot assimilate the Hmong. The Pathet Lao cannot assimilate the Hmong. After 2,000 years we can still say we are Hmong." The Lees consider themselves fortunate to have been permitted to return to their village after their capture in 1976, even if living conditions were miserable. Many Highland Hmong were forcibly relocated to lowland or plateau areas, where they were assigned to state-owned collective farms. The traditional Hmong fear of the lowlands proved justified. Resettled families frequently contracted tropical diseases to which they had not previously been exposed, particularly malaria, which is borne by mosquitoes that cannot survive at high elevations. In highland villages that were left intact, Any Hmong who was found practicing slash-and-burn agriculture was arrested. Most villages were infiltrated by Pathet Lao's soldiers. Very politely, one who seemed to be the leader would ask each Hmong family to shelter. By turns, two of their comrades who only want to serve you, wrote the Hmong scholar Yang Dao. But the Hmong soon realized that the two Pathet Lao placed in their family had as their sole mission to watch them day and night. Soon the husband did not dare talk to his wife, nor the parents to their children. The two Pathet Lao were listening to every word and spying on every move. Nobody could trust anybody. From time to time, the people would be awakened in the middle of the night and the houses searched under the pretense that a reactionary was hiding there. Then the husband or the son was led away, a gun against his back, to an unknown destination. The unknown destination was often a seminar camp near the Lao-Vietnamese border. Seminar camps, which combined forced labor and political indoctrination, were not reserved for the Hmong. Although many Hmong who had held government positions or worked for American agencies were sent there, some for years. More than 10,000 Lao intellectuals, civil servants, teachers, businessmen, military and police officers, and other suspected royalist sympathizers were also interned in camps, as well as the king, the queen, and the crown prince, all three of whom died there. The prisoners cleared land, tilled fields, felled trees, built roads, and were hitched like animals to plows. Some of them were also forced, at gunpoint, to search for and remove unexploded cluster bombs. I know two people who were sent to seminar camps. Blaya Yao Mua told me. One of them my wife and I asked him to lunch here in Merced. He don't want to eat. It is very strange because he was hungry for many years. One day when he's working in the camp he sees a lizard. He picks it up very fast because if a guard sees you do that he would hit you to death. He puts it in his pocket and when no one is watching he gets it out and eats it immediately. He's very happy. That lizard is fresh meat. He told me that story. That man, every day he had to sign a confession accepting you are wrong by collaborating with the Americans. Every day his confession became better. After 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, that speech became part of himself. Before he was in the camp he had a very strong personality. After 10 years it changed him. The camp has completely broken his personality. While 2,000 or 3,000 Hmong were being re-educated in Pathet Lao camps, an exercise in coerced submission that violated the core of the Hmong temper, tens of thousands were able to respond to the new regime in more characteristic Hmong fashion, through armed rebellion. After Vang Pao's departure, former members of the army clandestine organized a resistance movement based in the Phao Bia Massif, the highest mountain range in Laos, south of the plain of Jars. In late 1975, after Pathet Lao forces attacked a group of Hmong, mostly women and children, who were working in a Phao Bia field, Hmong rebels began a campaign of furious retaliation. Using weapons they had concealed in caves, they shot Pathet Lao's soldiers, dynamited bridges, blocked roads, blew up food convoys, and, just as Hmong warriors in 1772 had rolled boulders on the heads of the Chinese army in eastern Kwaichao, pushed rocks off cliffs while enemy troops were walking below. Although nearly 50,000 Hmong died, Phao Bia did not fall until 1978. Afterwards, Hmong guerrillas continued to live in the jungles along both sides of the Lao-Thai border, crossing back and forth between the two countries, launching irregular raids on the Lao People's Army. Most of the rebels belonged to a messianic group called Chao Fa, Lords of the Sky, led by Pa Cao Her, a former Vang Pao lieutenant who had broken ranks. Some belonged to Neo Ham, the United Laotian National Liberation Front, a group founded in the United States and headed by Vang Pao. Sporadic resistance by both groups, each of which has dwindled from thousands of guerrillas to 300 or 400, continues to this day, more than 2 decades after the war's official conclusion. The most widespread Hmong response to the terrors of post-war Laos, however, was migration, the same problem-solving strategy that had moved them around China for more than 3 millennia and then, starting at the beginning of the 19th century, had brought them to Laos. Most feared retribution, though some were motivated more immediately by famine, the consequence both of nationwide resource scarcity and of the increasing Hmong dependence. Toward the end of the war, on American rice drops, handouts in resettlement sites, and soldiers' wages. For nearly 10,000 Hmong, there were no crops to harvest. Some of the Hmong who left because they were starving were later stigmatized as undeserving economic migrants rather than legitimate political refugees. In June of 1975, the Vientiane Domestic Service, the capital's official radio station, broadcast the government's interpretation of the mass Hmong decampment, with the collusion of the Thai reactionary clique. The U.S. imperialists have now forced the Miao tribesmen to flee from Laos into Thailand. The aim of such an evacuation is not based on the so-called humanitarian basis, but is to exploit their labor at cheap prices and to foster them as their henchmen so that they can be sent back to Laos to sabotage peace in this country in the future. Every Hmong refugee has an exodus story. In the hierarchy of good fortune, my interpreter, Maying Xiong, and her family, along with the families of other military officers airlifted from Long Tieng, ranked at the top. All they had to do was leave behind every relative who did not belong to their immediate family, as well as virtually everything they owned, and, overnight, trade the high status they had enjoyed in Laos for a communal dormitory in a Thai refugee camp, where one bed was provided for their family of 8, and they stood in long lines for every meal, holding bowls for their rations of rice. "You were so lucky," I heard Now Cao tell Maying one night, when they were comparing their post-war experiences. A notch further down, an option for only a few privileged families, was escaping from Vientiane or another urban area by a taxi, which meant forking over one's life savings to a Lao driver who, along with his passengers, might or might not be arrested before reaching the Thai border. Most Hmong walked. Some traveled in small extended family bands, others in convoys of up to 8,000 people. I never heard of a Hmong who fled alone. In the first months after the fall of Long Tieng, when Pathet Lao efforts to block the Hmong Hijira were still disorganized, it was sometimes possible to drive one's livestock along major trails. Those people could just kill their animals along the way, so they didn't starve. Now Cao told me, they took it really easy. Later groups followed tiger and elephant trails, or steered clear of established routes altogether, walking the ridgelines whenever they could in order to avoid mines and detection. Most families, like the Lees, took about a month to reach Thailand, though some lived in the forests for 2 years or more, moving constantly to evade capture, sleeping under bamboo leaves, subsisting on game, though that soon became scarce, fruit, roots, bamboo shoots, the pith of trees, and insects. Desperate to fill their stomachs, some people chopped up their sweat-soaked clothes, mixed them with water and salt, and ate them. They lit fires only at night, so the smoke would not be visible. Sometimes they used foxfire, luminescent rotting wood, to light their way in the dark. Many people carried children on their backs. The babies presented a potentially fatal problem. They made noise. Silence was so essential that one Hmong woman, now living in Wisconsin, recalled that her son, who was a month old when the family left their home village, didn't know a single word when they arrived in Thailand 2 years later, because no one had talked during that entire period except in occasional whispers. Nearly every Hmong family I met in Merced had a story to tell about a baby, a relative's child, a neighbor's child, a member of the group they escaped with, who had been drugged with opium. When the babies would cry, a young mother named Yia Tao Xiong told me, we would mix the opium and water in a cup and give it to them so they would be quiet and the soldiers would not hear, because if they heard the babies, they would kill all of us. Usually the baby just went to sleep, but if you give too much by mistake, the baby dies. That happened many times. When I heard these stories, I recalled something I had once read about an Israeli child, hiding from Palestinian terrorists, who, when she began to cry, was accidentally smothered to death by her mother. That death, in 1979, was said to have driven the entire Israeli nation into mourning. The horror of the opium overdoses was not only that such things happened to the Hmong, but that they happened so frequently that, far from driving a nation into mourning, they never made headlines, never caught the world's ear, never reached beyond a community of families that numbly accepted them as a fact of life. Sometimes worse things happened. When I asked Now Cao about the boy with the scar on his forehead, whom Mei Li had mentioned in her 8th grade essay, he said, "You had to be very quiet. The father of that little baby tried to kill him so he wouldn't cry and everyone would get killed. He had a slash on his head. Somebody saved him and now he is living in Merced. Able-bodied adults usually took turns carrying the elderly, the sick, and the wounded until they were no longer able to do so. At that point, by a process of agonizing triage, the burdensome relatives were left by the side of the trail, usually with a little food and a little opium. People who died en route were left to rot. It was too dangerous to take time to bury them. To understand what these choices were like, it is important to remember that the Hmong revere their elders, and also that the soul of anyone who is not accorded the proper funerary rites, being washed, dressed in special clothes, honored with animal sacrifices, verbally guided back to the place where one's placenta is buried, lamented with death drum and qaug, and laid to rest in a hand-hewn coffin on the shoulder of a sloping mountain, is doomed to an eternity of restless wandering. Jonas Vongay said, "Not to bury the dead is terrible. Not to carry your relatives is terrible. It is the worst thing in the world to have the responsibility to choose between you and them." On their way to Thailand, Hmong families walked through abandoned villages and untended fields. They passed piles of jewelry, silver bars, and embroidered garments. Fu had discarded her entire dowry of pine top, which previous refugees had jettisoned. They also passed many decomposing corpses. Dang Mua, a Merced businessman whose family lived during their 3-week journey on birds he shot with a homemade crossbow and poison-tipped bamboo arrows, saw dozens of ragged orphan children in the forest, eating leaves and dirt. He gave them food but walked on past. His wife found a baby, less than a year old, trying to nurse from the breast of its dead mother. They walked past it, too. Because Hue Sui was west of the Mekong River, the Lees were able to cross the Thai border on foot. Farther south, the Mekong, which is up to a mile wide, forms the Lao-Thai boundary for more than 500 miles. Most Hmong refugees had to cross it. The Mekong River is 10 times bigger than the Merced River, said Jonas Vongay. So how do you cross? Most Hmong people do not swim. If you have money, maybe you can pay Lao for a boat. You can hold a tree branch. Bamboo floats better than wood, so you can lash it together. But later on all the bamboo is gone because people have already cut it down, and you have to carry it all the way down from the mountains. Crossing this river, everyone here in the United States continue to dream of that nightmare. Some people attempted to float across the Mekong with bamboo stalks placed under their armpits, on banana wood rafts, or in inner tubes purchased from Lao traders. The inner tubes were hard to find and very expensive, because the Pathet Lao border patrol killed people who sold them. Many babies and small children who had survived the journey this far drowned while crossing the river strapped to their parents' backs. Their bodies were left in the Mekong. A few Hmong refugees managed to bring empty plastic gallon containers. Still others inflate ordinary grocery plastic bags, wrote Dominica Garcia, a doctor working in a Thai refugee camp, in a 1978 letter to the director of the International Rescue Committee. It is not unusual to find these survivors clinging to their makeshift lifesavers, even long after they have been in the detention centers. They carry them up to the hospital wards where they finally get proper treatment. One resident of Merced was 16 years old when he and his extended family reached the Mekong. They were able to obtain a boat large enough to hold half their party. He and another adult crossed the river first, bringing all the children. The other man paddled the boat back to the Lao side and picked up the rest of the adults. On the return trip, when the boat was halfway across the river, the border patrol sank the boat and fired on the passengers. From the Thai shore, the teenager and the children watched their parents, uncles, and aunts all die from bullets and drowning. Dang Mua's cousin Mua Ki once unsuccessfully tried to procure federal disability benefits for a mentally disturbed Hmong woman in Merced who, a decade earlier, had attempted to cross the Mekong with a party of 170 people. They wait for the sun to go down and do a night crossing, he explained. And then, one group of Pathet Lao opened 3 machine gun. This lady, she saw more than 20 people fall down and die in one place. And one of them was her husband. I think she is sick now because maybe she saw too many trouble. One afternoon, when Blaya Yao Mua and I were chatting, as we had on many previous occasions, I happened to make a casual remark about the cohesiveness of Hmong society. He said, "Yes. If a person outside the community see a Hmong person, they look that way. but inside they have guilt. Many feelings of guilt. You go from the north of Laos and then you go across the Mekong. And when the Pathet Lao soldiers fire, you do not think about your family, just yourself only. When you are on the other side, you will not be like what you were before you get through the Mekong. On the other side you cannot say to your wife, I love you more than my life. She saw. You cannot say that anymore. And when you try to restick this thing together, it is like putting glue on a broken glass. An unknowable fraction of the Hmong who attempted to flee Laos, some survivors estimate it was half. Some much less, died en route, from Pathet Lao and Vietnamese bullets and mines, as well as from disease, starvation, exposure, snakebite, tiger maulings, poisoning by toxic plants, and drowning. Most of those who reached Thailand ended up, often after being robbed and occasionally after being raped by Thai bandits, in district police stations. From there, they were sent to refugee camps. When they arrived, 80% were found to be suffering from malnutrition, malaria, anemia, and infections, especially of the feet. At first, the Hmong were placed in a string of makeshift camps near the Lao border, officially speaking, because Thailand had not signed the 1951 Geneva Convention on the Status of Refugees. They were illegal immigrants, but the Thai government was willing to grant them temporary residency as long as other nations paid the bills, and promised them permanent asylum. Eventually most of the Hmong, who kept streaming across the Lao border until the early 1990s, were consolidated into one large camp in northeast Thailand, 15 miles south of the Mekong River. At its peak, in 1986, the Ban Vinai camp had 42,858 inhabitants, of which about 90% were Hmong. It was the largest Hmong settlement in history, larger even than Long Tieng, General Vang Pao's former military base. Ban Vinai was, in effect, a large-scale charitable institution that continued the job, effectively begun by wartime rice drops, of eroding Hmong self-sufficiency. Depending on how you looked at it, life there was either a catastrophic deracination or a useful dress rehearsal for life in the American inner cities, to which many of its inhabitants would ultimately relocate. Though it lacked electricity, running water, and sewage disposal, the camp was so densely populated that it was, in effect, urban. A 1986 survey by a Catholic relief agency concluded, like other poor urban communities, Ban Vinai has problems of inadequate health, overcrowding, welfare dependency, unemployment, substance abuse, prostitution, and anomie, suicide, abandonment, loneliness. Jonas Vange told me, in Ban Vinai, you don't have the right to do anything except get a ration of rice and beans, and go to your tent, and you do that for 5 or 10 years. People were born and grew up there. The young ones play soccer and volleyball. The elderly person just sleep day and night. They just wait and see and wait and eat and wait and die and wait and die. According to Dwight Conquergood, the enthusiastic ethnographer from the International Rescue Committee who organized the Ban Vinai Rabies Parade, the camp officials tended to hold the Hmong responsible for their own dependence, poor health, and lack of cleanliness, instead of seeing the Hmong as struggling within a constraining context of historical, political, and economic forces that have reduced them from proud, independent mountain people to landless refugees. The Hmong are blamed for their miserable condition, he observed. Conquergood was astonished at how violently most of the other Westerners at the camp disliked the Hmong, whom he liked very much. He wrote, I began to collect the phrases used regularly to describe the Hmong by agency officials who worked in Ban Vinai. The word I heard most often was filthy, followed closely by dirty, and often part of a cluster of terms that included scabies, abscesses, feces, and piles of garbage. A phrase regularly employed to cover a multitude of perceived sanitation sins was the following: they're one step out of the Stone Age. You know, a meaning-packed word heard about the Hmong almost every day was difficult, and its ramified derivatives. Difficult to work with, the most difficult group, set in their ways, rigid, stubborn, you cannot get through to them, backward, one dedicated humanitarian agency employee who had worked with the Hmong for several years told me that the hand of God is on this place, but as for the Hmong living here, they're a fearful lot. You cannot work with them. Conquergood believed that this focus on dirtiness and difficulty was actually an expression of Western expatriates' uneasiness when confronted with difference. The other, a Western aid official's encounter with the Hmong, is a confrontation with radical difference in cosmology, worldview, ethos, texture of life. Unfortunately, as the French critic Tsvetan Todorov reminds us, the first spontaneous reaction with regard to the stranger is to imagine him as inferior, since he is different from us. Most of the people who made those disparaging comments about the Hmong came from the United States, to which the majority of the inhabitants of Ban Vinai eventually emigrated. About 10,000 Hmong resettled in France, Canada, Australia, Argentina, French Guiana, and elsewhere, but because of their American military ties and because Vang Pao had already established residence in Montana, they preferred the United States by a huge margin. In 1975, the U.S. was willing to admit fewer than 300 Hmong, mostly Army officers and their families, but both the quotas and the eligibility requirements were liberalized over the years, with about 25,000 Hmong admitted in 1980 alone. As with Vietnamese and Cambodian refugees, the best educated Hmong and Lao came to America in the first wave of immigration and the least educated in later waves, because for several years the U.S. refused to accept extended family groups of more than 8 people, but did not limit the size of nuclear families. The Hmong, none of whom had birth certificates, grew accustomed to lying when they were interviewed by immigration officials. Second wives became daughters or sisters. Nieces and nephews became daughters and sons. According to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, which supervised Ban Vinai, every refugee problem has 3 possible durable solutions: local integration, voluntary repatriation, and resettlement in another country. Thailand, which was buffeted simultaneously by refugees from Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia, emphatically rejected the first solution. The Hmong emphatically rejected the second solution. In 1981, they also began to reject the third solution, leading Ban Vinai to become a kind of never-ending camp, or, as one U.S. refugee official termed it, a non-durable non-solution. In 1984, Eric E. Morris, the UN Deputy Refugee Representative in Thailand, said in bewilderment, "This is a unique situation historically. The Hmong are the first refugees we know who were offered resettlement and in large numbers simply turned it down. Some of them worried that the Hmong resistance movement in Laos, which was fueled by manpower and leadership in Ban Vinai, as well as by money funneled through the camp from refugees in the United States, would collapse if they left Asia. Most of them, however, had heard rumors about life in America from earlier immigrants, and were just plain scared of tenements, of urban violence, of welfare dependence, of never being able to farm again, of being forbidden to sacrifice animals, of being thrown in jail if their grandfathers smoked opium, of ogres, of dinosaurs, and, as they made clear during the notorious 1982 meeting on the Ban Vinai soccer field, of doctors who ate the livers, kidneys, and brains of Hmong patients. Ban Vinai started to look pretty good. It may have been dirty, crowded, and disease-ridden, but culturally it was still powerfully Hmong. Women sewed pine top, though some of them forsook the old motifs of elephants' feet and ram's horns for embroidered soldiers with bayonets. Men made jewelry, though when silver was unavailable some of them melted down discarded aluminum cans. Many families raised chickens or tended small vegetable plots. Most compellingly, according to Dwight Conquergood, no matter where you go in the camp, at almost any hour of the day or night, you can simultaneously hear 2 or 3 performances, from simple storytelling and folk singing to elaborate collective ritual performances for the dead, including drumming, stylized lamentation, ritual chanting, manipulation of funerary artifacts, incense, fire, dancing, and animal sacrifice. Nearly every morning I was awakened before dawn by the drumming and ecstatic chanting of performing shamans. The older among was, the less willing he or she was to leave. At the camp, the cultural tradition was still there. Blaya Yao Mua told me. There was patrilineage. Children still listened to grandpa. What is the good to go over there to America if all that change? And a lot of elderly people. Though they never say it openly to strangers. What really haunts them is they are afraid in America they will not have a good funeral ceremony and a good grave. And that is more important than any other thing in the world. Thailand closed Ban Vinai in 1992. Its 11,500 inhabitants were told they absolutely, positively had only two choices: to apply for resettlement in another country, or to return to Laos. As an interim measure, the resettlers were to move to one camp, and the repatriators to another. Panic ensued. Hmong who for more than a decade had resisted coming to the United States now decided it was the safer of two abhorrent options, and then were rejected. With the support of the United States, where anti-immigrant sentiment was gathering steam, the Thai government and the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees instituted a new and more stringent set of eligibility requirements under which nearly 2,000 Hmong applicants were denied refugee status. Since 1991, about 7,000 Hmong have uneasily returned to Laos, persuaded that repressive conditions there have slackened. No more forced collectivization. No more seminar camps. Although those who repatriate in groups are assigned to lowland sites, may not return to their home villages, and may not practice/and-burn agriculture, at least their families, or, so they have been assured, will no longer be in danger. There have been reports, however, all of them denied by the Laotian, Thai, and U.S. governments and by the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, that some Hmong have been forced by Thai authorities to return to Laos against their will, and, once there, have been persecuted or killed. Asterisk. More than 10,000 Hmong, most of them inhabitants of Ban Vinai, simply said no to both choices and fled, whether temporarily or permanently. No one knows, to the sanctified grounds of Wat Tam Krabak, a Buddhist monastery north of Bangkok. Surrounded by coercive pressures on all sides, they managed to find a way out, as they had done so many times before during their intransigent history, by moving in a direction none of their keepers could have predicted. Thai authorities were reportedly astonished that 10,000 Hmong had managed to slip through their fingers. They should have known better. For as long as there have been Hmong, there have been ways to get out of tight spots. In the greatest of all Hmong folktales, she, Yee, a healer and magician who was the forerunner of today's Siv Neebs, was once ambushed by 9 evil Dab brothers who ate human flesh and drank their blood. In the version collected by Charles Johnson, the brothers lay in wait for she, Yee, at a mountain crossroads where 9 paths led to every corner of the earth, and where the rocks looked like tigers and dragons. When the brothers transformed themselves into water buffaloes, so did she, Yee. When they tossed him on their horns, he changed back into a man, and he chopped them into small pieces with his magical saber. When the pieces joined together and came back to life, he turned into a cloud and mounted high in the sky. When the brothers became a strong wind, she, Yee, became a drop of water. When one of the brothers became a leaf that would catch the drop of water, he became a deer, and he ran into the forest. The brothers became wolves, and they chased she, Yee, until the sun was low in the western sky, hanging at the edge of the earth. 8 of the brothers were too tired to go on, but the oldest one kept running. When she, Yee, saw an abandoned rat's burrow, he changed himself into a rat. The oldest brother turned into a cat, and waited at the edge of the burrow. She, Yee, changed into a caterpillar with stinging fuzz, and the cat spat him back into the hole. As he waited in the hole, she, Yee, got angrier and angrier. When the cat fell asleep, she, Yee, turned himself into a very tiny red ant. Quickly and fiercely, he bit the cat on the testicle. Then he went home to his wife.